What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to more Outriders. Now, today's quest is to provide you with one of the best solo Devastator builds for expeditions early on. So if you're thinking of trying out the Devastator class and need an absolutely killer build to fly through expeditions, this video is going to be just for you. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. You're saying, hey, Silverback, everybody kind of knows Devastators, little suspect, right? But I'm telling you guys, Devastators are a blast to play with. They are very underrated, and if you have the right build, you can fly through expeditions just like any other class. So as always, I'll do my best to continue to provide you guys with some of the best Outriders guides, tips, endgame builds, news, and more. So don't miss out on those. Make sure you tap that subscribe and like button to make sure that you get those videos when they come out. Thank you so much for subscribing. I really do appreciate you, and let's go ahead and get started with today's video. All right, so let's discuss the overview and intention of this build. For starters, again, this is an early start build that is meant to allow you to easily solo expeditions from tier 1 to about tier 10 or so without any tier 3 mods or legendary gear. I will be providing an update to the build in another video to address tier 10 through tier 15, and of course that tier 15 farming with it. Besides this, the build relies heavily on skill rotations, which we'll discuss shortly, but allows the Devastator to have a good armor buff, but also be able to dish out a lot of AoE damage. On top of this, with our skill rotation and impale skill, you will also see that you can defeat elites very easily while maintaining a lot of health. Okay, so let's go ahead and cover the class tree. For this build, we're going to be using the seismic shifter branch, which means we're going to be relying heavily on anomaly power, close range, and the bleed status. So at this point, feel free to pause the video at any time and copy the node selection, but I'll cover some important aspects of our selection. For starters, we have selected anomaly reservoir wherever possible for the most amount of anomaly power boost. Be aware that when we get to the gear, this will be a priority for attributes as well. Since we rely on earthquake and impale to dish out our damage, we unlock endless tremors wherever possible to decrease our cooldown time. Paladin is absolutely crucial for giving us a huge anomaly power buff when using golem, which plays into our skill rotations as well. Now, since Devastators heal from close range kills only, we increase what is considered close range to ensure our kills are always going to be healing us. Speaking of healing, blood donation allows you to be healed for 25% of your bleed damage, which is important for this build. Our mods will take advantage of this along with impale to always have the bleed status on enemies, so we're always going to be healing, then receiving the big heals from killing enemies close range. Honestly, this combination makes this build have a great survival aspect to it as well, and what makes it very useful for soloing expeditions. Since we are focusing on anomaly power, protected by the anomaly will increase our armor significantly based on 40% of our anomaly power. Last but not least, Earth's Heritage increases our seismic skills base damage by a huge and whopping 50%. Moving on to skills, as we previously mentioned, we're going to be using Golem, Earthquake, and Impale. I have them in this order specifically because our rotation will be to use Golem, then Earthquake on big mobs, and then Impale on the elite. Remember that Golem has to activate first, as it gives us a 45% increase in anomaly power from the Paladin passive. Now, also just a side note, but if you kill an elite with Impale, you'll also get a huge armor and health regeneration buff for all allies, which makes this build not bad for multiplayer as well. At the end of this video, if you're still unsure of how to do these skill rotations or how I've been using this build specifically, I'll go ahead and leave some gameplay available for you to watch. So since we went over skills, let's explain these skill rotations, because at the end of the day, this build is all about skill rotations and anomaly power. As stated, our skills are Golem, Earthquake, and Impale. These can be better titled as armor/anomaly boost, AoE big mobs for big damage, and then nuke the elite specifically in that order. As you'll see in the gameplay, I'll try to use Golem, then Earthquake, then Impale, which for the most part lets me completely obliterate a mob or two and some elites in front of me. Now, Earthquake will have the fastest cooldown of all three, which is great because you should be using this 1 or 2 times again before your Golem is even back up, which lets you run around and remove most of the big groups of enemies. Once all 3 skills are available, you really want to try and save that skill rotation for the elites, so I would use Earthquake on the groups of enemies, and once an elite is spawned, I'll use Golem and then Impale on them. Based on our build, Impale will only have 2 uses, so try your best not to waste it on easy enemies. Another note about Impale is that you need to center your camera and game on that elite to have it be used on them, so practice makes perfect with dodging in and out of mobs to lock on an elite and then use that Impale skill. Now, besides the rotation, I want to point out that Earthquake does apply bleed damage from our mods, which I'll discuss shortly, but most importantly, Earthquake is your main healing skill, so if your health starts to dip and you need to heal immediately, use Earthquake as many times as you can. This comes from not only the bleed damage it applies, but also for the fact that it's used on big groups of enemies, which will be one shot from Earthquake, thus healing you tremendously. Moving on to gear attributes, the most important is going to be anomaly power. Quite frankly, all of your gear pieces should have anomaly power as a bonus. This is absolutely critical for the damage output of Earthquake and Impale. Besides this, cooldown reduction and close range damage are next on the list. In a perfect world, I'd probably have every armor piece with these 3 or at least anomaly power. With that being said, if you receive a new piece of armor but does not have anomaly power, do not swap it and just keep farming for a roll with anomaly power. Okay, so let's discuss what mods I would recommend. For starters, since this is just a beginner build and meant for those devastators just getting started, we're going to focus mainly on just tier 1 mods. Now, I do have some tier 2 and tier 3 mods planned for this build that are going to make it pretty insane, but for now, obviously, it would be unrealistic to tell you to equip all tier 2 and tier 3 if you're just starting out. So first and foremost, you'll want extra Quake and Impaler, which will give you 2 Earthquakes and 2 Impalers before your cooldown. This is very handy for dishing out extra damage, especially to elites with 2 Impales. Next is Blood Shock, which inflicts bleed on enemies hit with Earthquake. Remember that bleed also heals us, but River of the Blood mod will cause our Impale to do 50% more damage to enemies affected with bleed. So it's very important that we try to get bleed on everything, including those elites. Again, this is going to be important for our rotation, where we gain a boost of anomaly power from Golem, Earthquake to take out the large group, but in that group is an elite or 2. They will now have bleed on them, in which you'll follow up with your Impale to do some massive damage to them. For a 5th skill, I'd recommend using Armor Boost just to grant you some extra armor every time you use Earthquake. So for example, if I have 5 enemies in front of me and I use Earthquake, I'll receive about 24,000 in armor, giving you some additional cushion. Now for your weapon mod, you could add bleeding or improve bleeding bullets, so as you shoot large waves of enemies, you're always going to be constantly healing. Now this is going to be a nice to have feature for this build early on, but I would recommend using the Thunderbird for your weapon of choice. The Ultimate Storm Whip mod on it isn't excellent for dishing out extra damage from your weapon, since Devastators obviously don't have an anomaly based bullet skill. The anomaly power of Thunderbird will also scale based on our anomaly power, which is at the core of our build, making it again the perfect weapon. Now if you don't have this, stick to assault rifles, SMGs, or full auto shotguns with anomaly power as an attribute to at least give you a boost there. So there you have it, our very first Devastator build, and one that is easily doable for Devastator beginners. Now I fully plan on updating this build in a soon to come video, so if you don't want to miss out on that, tap that subscribe and like button. We also have other class builds in the works as we speak, so be on the lookout for those. Also, if you have a great Devastator build that you'd like to share, feel free to throw it in the comments below. And without further ado, my name is Silverback, our quest is complete, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.